You didn't just watch a knockout. You watched a shift that nobody is explaining yet. Because what Carlos Prates did to Jack Della Maddalena wasn't supposed to look like that. Not this clean. Not this sudden. Not against someone who was already being talked about as next in line. And that's where things get uncomfortable. The MMA community is reacting, but not all in the same way. Some are calling it a statement win. Others? They're asking quiet questions. The kind you don't see trending. The kind that don't get posted with highlight clips. Because here's the twist, this wasn't just about one punch. This was about timing, matchmaking, momentum. And while everyone's focused on the knockout, something else is happening in the background. A shift in how certain fighters are being positioned, and who might be getting pushed forward faster than expected. Now add fuel to that. Because while all this is unfolding, Sean Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev are going back and forth again, and it's not random. The timing of that exchange? It lines up a little too perfectly with everything else going on. So now you've got two storylines colliding. A knockout that changes rankings overnight. And a rivalry heating up at the exact same moment. That's not coincidence. That's movement. And the real question isn't just how Carlos Prates pulled it off. It's who benefits the most from it happening right now. Because once you start connecting those dots, this story gets a lot deeper than a knockout clip. Something felt off the moment the fight ended. Not because of the knockout itself, but because of how clean, how decisive, and how final it looked. Carlos Prates didn't just win. He erased any doubt in a matter of seconds against Jack Della Maddalena, a fighter many had already placed on a fast track toward title contention. And that's where the conversation starts to shift from excitement to confusion. Because when a fighter with that kind of momentum gets stopped like that, it forces people to reevaluate everything they thought they knew. At first, the reaction was predictable. Fans flooded social media calling it one of the cleanest knockouts of the year. Analysts replayed the sequence, breaking down the timing, the precision, the way Prates stayed composed under pressure. It looked like the perfect execution of a game plan. But as the initial hype settled, something else started to creep in. A quieter kind of discussion, one that wasn't being pushed to the front, but was definitely happening in the background. Because this wasn't just a highlight. This was a disruption. Jack Della Maddalena wasn't just another opponent. He represented stability in the division. A fighter who was building consistency, stacking wins, and slowly positioning himself as a serious contender. So when someone like Carlos Prates steps in and ends that trajectory so abruptly, it doesn't just elevate one name. It destabilizes the entire picture. And that's where things get interesting. Because now the question isn't just, how good is Prates? It's, what does this do to everyone else? Fighters who were expecting a certain path forward suddenly have to reconsider their position. Matchups that seemed obvious no longer make sense. And behind the scenes, decision makers are forced to adjust quickly. You could already see hints of that adjustment in how the MMA community started reacting. Some fighters praised the performance immediately, giving credit where it was due. Others were more measured, almost cautious, like they were still processing what it meant. That difference in reaction says a lot. Because when something truly unexpected happens, even professionals take a moment to recalibrate. Meanwhile, Prates himself didn't over-celebrate. That's another detail people picked up on. His reaction wasn't wild or emotional. It was controlled, focused, almost like he expected this outcome. And when a fighter carries that kind of energy after a result like that, it changes how people perceive the performance. It stops looking like an upset and starts looking like a statement that was planned. But here's where the tension builds. Because while everyone is trying to figure out where Prates fits now, there's an underlying question about how this matchup came together in the first place. Not in a controversial way, but in a strategic one. Timing matters in this sport. Who fights who, and when can shape entire divisions. And this particular moment feels like it might have been more significant than it appeared on the surface. At the same time, the ripple effect is already spreading beyond just these two fighters. Other names in the division are being pulled into the conversation, whether they want to be or not. Suddenly, rankings feel less stable, predictions feel less certain, and fans are starting to look at upcoming fights with a different level of curiosity. Because once a result like this happens, it changes expectations. It reminds everyone that nothing is guaranteed. And in a division that was starting to feel structured, this kind of disruption reintroduces unpredictability in a major way. That's why this moment matters more than it seems. Not just because of the knockout, but because of what it forces everyone to reconsider moving forward. What makes this moment even more complicated is what started happening immediately after the knockout. Not inside the cage, but across the wider MMA landscape. Because while people were still replaying the finish, conversations were already shifting toward what this means for the division moving forward. And that's where things began to feel less like a single result and more like the beginning of a chain reaction. Carlos Prates didn't just win, he inserted himself into a space that was already crowded with expectations, timelines, and unofficial rankings that people thought were locked in. At the center of that disruption is what this loss does to Jack Della Maddalena. Because this wasn't a competitive back and forth where adjustments could be explained away. This was decisive. The kind of result that forces immediate questions about durability, positioning, and how quickly a fighter can recover, not just physically, but in terms of narrative. Fighters at that level don't just compete for wins, they compete for momentum. And when momentum gets stopped like that, rebuilding it becomes a different kind of challenge. Meanwhile, Prates' name started moving faster than anyone expected. Within hours, analysts were already discussing potential matchups that would have seemed premature just days earlier. That's how quickly things shift when a performance hits this hard. The same voices that hadn't fully committed to placing him among the top names were now reconsidering where he belongs. And behind the scenes, those conversations tend to happen even faster than what reaches the public. But here's where another layer gets added to the situation. Because at the same time, this conversation is evolving. Sean Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev are going back and forth again, and the timing is difficult to ignore. Their exchanges aren't new, but the intensity and visibility of this latest back and forth landed right alongside the fallout from the knockout. That overlap creates a moment where multiple narratives are competing for attention, and in a sport like MMA, that's rarely accidental. Strickland's approach has always been direct, unpredictable, and impossible to overlook. When he speaks, people react, whether they agree or not. Chimaev, on the other hand, carries a different kind of presence. Focused, intense, and always positioned as a serious threat to anyone in front of him. When those two start engaging publicly, it naturally pulls attention. But now, with Prates entering the conversation after a performance like that, the dynamics start to shift. Because suddenly, it's not just about one rivalry. It's about how multiple fighters are being positioned at the same time. Fans are starting to notice that overlap. Not in a conspiratorial way, but in a pattern recognition way. Big moments are happening close together. Attention is being divided across different storylines. And when that happens, it often means the landscape is being reshaped in real time. You can see it in how discussions are forming. Some fans are focused on whether Prates should be fast-tracked into a bigger fight. Others are still debating how Della Maddalena rebounds from a loss like this. And then, there's a whole separate conversation around Strickland and Chimaev, with people questioning whether their back and forth is building towards something immediate or just maintaining visibility. All of these threads are happening at once. And that's what makes this moment feel different. Because instead of one clear storyline, you have several developing simultaneously, each influencing the other in subtle ways. The knockout doesn't exist on its own. It feeds into everything else. It changes how fans view upcoming matchups, how analysts frame their predictions, and how fighters themselves might start adjusting their approach. There's also a psychological element that can't be ignored. When a fighter like Prates delivers a result like that, it sends a message, not just to the person he defeated, but to everyone watching. It introduces a new variable into the division. Someone who might not have been fully accounted for before is now impossible to overlook. And that forces other fighters to reconsider how they prepare, who they call out, and how they position themselves moving forward. At the same time, the conversation around Della Maddalena becomes more complex. Because fighters in his position aren't defined by one loss, but they are shaped by how they respond to it. The way he moves next, the adjustments he makes, and the opponents he faces will all be viewed through the lens of this moment. And that adds pressure, even if it's not openly discussed. So now, instead of a clear path forward, the division feels more open, but also more uncertain. And when uncertainty enters a space that once felt structured, it tends to create opportunities for some and challenges for others. That's exactly where things stand right now. What's really starting to stand out now is how the tone across the MMA world has subtly shifted from reaction to recalculation. The knockout is still being replayed, still being praised, but behind that, something more strategic is happening. Fighters, analysts, and even fans are beginning to remap the division in their heads. Because when Carlos Prates delivers a performance like that, it doesn't just earn him recognition, it forces everyone else to adjust their expectations in real time. And that kind of adjustment isn't always comfortable. You can see it in how conversations are evolving. Early reactions were emotional, shock, excitement, disbelief. But now the language is different. People are asking where Prates fits, who he should face next, and how quickly he should be moved up. That shift from emotion to strategy is where the real impact of a moment like this starts to take shape. Because once a fighter enters that level of discussion, they're no longer being treated as a surprise. They're being treated as a factor. At the same time, Jack Della Maddalena is now facing a completely different kind of spotlight. Not one based on hype, but one based on response. Fighters at his level don't just get evaluated on wins. They get evaluated on resilience. How they come back, how they adjust, and how they rebuild momentum becomes the new narrative. And that's not easy, especially when the loss was as clear and decisive as this one. It creates a situation where every next step carries more weight than usual. But the story doesn't stop with just these two names. Because while all of this is unfolding, the ongoing tension between Sean Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev continues to pull attention in a different direction. Their exchanges aren't just noise. They influence how fans and analysts frame the division. Strickland's blunt, unpredictable style contrasts sharply with Chimaev's focused, almost relentless approach. And when those two collide verbally, it creates a narrative that feels separate, but still connected to everything else happening. That connection becomes clearer when you look at timing. Because as Prates rises into the conversation, Strickland and Chimaev are already positioned as major figures in the same space. That overlap creates a situation where multiple storylines are competing and blending at the same time. It's no longer just about one fighter's breakthrough. It's about how that breakthrough interacts with existing rivalries and future matchups. Fans are picking up on that complexity. Some are starting to draw lines between these narratives, imagining scenarios where these fighters eventually intersect. Others are more cautious, focusing on immediate matchups rather than long-term possibilities. But either way, the level of engagement has increased. People aren't just watching, they're analyzing, predicting, and debating in a way that reflects how open the division suddenly feels. There's also a subtle shift in how fighters themselves might be thinking right now. When a new name rises quickly, it changes risk calculations. Do you call out someone like Prates immediately, hoping to stop that momentum? Or do you wait, let the situation settle, and focus on more predictable paths? Those decisions don't get announced publicly, but they shape how matchups come together behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Prates' own position becomes more complex with every passing day. The more attention he receives, the more expectations grow. What was initially seen as a breakthrough now starts to look like a standard he'll be expected to maintain. And maintaining that level is often harder than reaching it. Opponents will study him more closely. Game plans will be built specifically to counter what he just showed. And that means his next performance will carry a different kind of pressure. At the same time, the conversation around Della Maddalena continues to evolve. It's no longer just about the loss. It's about the narrative that follows it. Some see this as a temporary setback, something he can recover from with the right adjustments. Others view it as a moment that exposed vulnerabilities that need to be addressed quickly. That difference in perception adds another layer to the overall story. So now, instead of a clear hierarchy, the division feels fluid. Positions aren't fixed. Expectations aren't stable. And every new development has the potential to shift things again. That's what makes this moment feel ongoing rather than complete. Because nothing about this situation has settled yet. And that uncertainty is exactly what keeps everyone watching. And now everything settles into that uneasy phase where nothing is officially decided, but everything feels like it's already shifting. The highlight is played out, the reactions have spread, and yet the real story hasn't reached a clear conclusion. Because when a moment like this hits the division, it doesn't wrap up neatly, it stretches forward, influencing decisions that haven't even been announced yet. Carlos Prates isn't just coming off a knockout anymore. He's stepping into a space where expectations are rising faster than clarity. And that kind of momentum can either elevate a fighter quickly or put them under pressure they didn't have before. You can already sense that pressure forming. Every discussion about his next move carries a different tone now. It's not just about who he should fight. It's about whether he's ready for the level people are now placing him at. That shift happens quietly, but it changes everything. Opponents won't approach him the same way. Analysts won't frame him the same way. Even fans start watching differently, looking for signs that confirm or challenge what they just witnessed. At the same time, Della Maddalena is navigating the opposite side of that momentum. The attention hasn't disappeared, it's just changed direction. Instead of focusing on his rise, it's now centered on his response. That's where fighters often redefine themselves. Not in the immediate aftermath, but in how they rebuild, how they adjust, and how they handle the weight of a moment that didn't go their way. What makes this situation even more layered is how it connects back to the broader narrative involving Strickland and Khamzat Chimaev. Their ongoing back and forth hasn't slowed down, and if anything, it feels more relevant now. Because while Prates is rising into the conversation, Strickland and Chimaev are already established within it. That creates a dynamic where new momentum meets existing tension, and the result is a division that feels more active than it has in a while. Fans are starting to connect those layers more clearly. What once felt like separate conversations is now blending into a single, evolving picture. The knockout, the rivalry, the shifting expectations. They're all influencing how people see the future of this weight class. And when multiple narratives begin to overlap like this, it usually means something bigger is taking shape behind the scenes. There's also a growing sense that timing is playing a crucial role, not just in the fights themselves, but in how everything is unfolding around them. Moments like this don't exist in isolation. They interact with each other, creating opportunities for some fighters while complicating paths for others. That's why this doesn't feel random. It feels like a sequence, even if it wasn't planned that way. Meanwhile, fighters across the division are watching closely, because when a new name disrupts the landscape, it forces everyone to reconsider their position. Some will see opportunity in that disruption, looking for chances to capitalize on the uncertainty. Others will approach it more cautiously, waiting to see how things stabilize before making their next move. Either way, the ripple effect is real, and it's influencing decisions that haven't even been made public yet. And that's where the tension continues to build. Nothing has fully settled. No clear path has been confirmed. The division feels open, but also unpredictable. And in that kind of environment, every new development carries more weight than usual. A single fight, a single performance, a single moment can shift everything again. That's why this story doesn't feel finished. It feels like it's still forming. The knockout was just the entry point. What comes next? How Prates handles the spotlight, how Della Maddalena responds, how Strickland and Shamit continue to shape the conversation. That's where the real direction of this division will be defined. And right now, that direction is still wide open. Now it's on you. Because this isn't just another fight recap, this is a moment that's about to shape everything next. You saw what Carlos Prates did. You saw how fast Jack Della Maddalena went from rising contender to a question mark overnight. And at the same time, you've got Sean Strickland and Khamzat Shamit turning up the heat like something bigger is coming. So let's be real for a second. Was that knockout just a perfect moment, or are we watching the start of a takeover? I want your honest take. Not the safe one. Not the popular one. Do you think Prates is ready for the top names right now? Or did he just catch the perfect timing against the wrong opponent? And what about JDM? Does he bounce back stronger? Or did this expose something deeper? And don't ignore this part. How does all of this connect to Strickland and Shamit? Because if you're paying attention, these stories aren't separate anymore. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading everything. If you rock with breakdowns that go deeper than highlights, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next update in this situation, it's going to hit fast. Stay locked in, because this division just changed, and most people haven't caught up yet.